The moment I crossed the town line into Driftwood, Oregon, I felt something was off. The sign welcoming me was faded, with edges curling inward like the town itself was trying to disappear. Population 847. At least that's what it said, though the 7 looked suspiciously like it had been painted over something else. I didn't have many options after what happened in Portland. When you punch your boss at a fancy restaurant because he groped a waitress, word gets around. Blacklisted doesn't begin to cover it. My cousin Mitch mentioned they were desperate for help at the McDonald's where he worked in his hometown. "They'll hire anyone with a pulse," he'd said. "And the pay's decent for Driftwood." My 2008 Honda Civic coughed and rattled as I pulled into the town's main street. Driftwood had that picture-perfect small-town vibe that always made me uneasy. Too neat, too quiet. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business except for the things they collectively decide to ignore. The McDonald's stood at the edge of town, its golden arches somehow duller than any I'd seen before. The building looked like every other McDonald's, yet something was slightly wrong about it. The proportions seemed off, like it had been built by someone who'd only seen a McDonald's in a dream. I parked and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Daniel Pierce. 26 unshaven dark circles under brown eyes. Messy black hair that needed a cut weeks ago. I looked exactly like what I was. A guy whose life had gone sideways. Mitch was waiting for me inside, his lanky frame leaning against the counter. His face broke into a grin when he saw me. "Danny boy, you made it!" He pulled me into an awkward hug, slapping my back too hard. "Hey Mitch, thanks for this. I was running out of options." "No problem, man. Family looks out for family. Plus, we're seriously shorthanded since." He trailed off, glancing at an older woman who was wiping down tables with mechanical precision. "Since what?" Mitch lowered his voice. "Nothing major. Just some staff turnover. Happens everywhere, right?" Before I could press him, a door behind the counter swung open, and a short, stocky man with a perfectly trimmed mustache emerged. His manager tag read Richard Simmons. I had to stop myself from smirking. "Mr. Pierce, I presume?" His voice was surprisingly deep for his frame. "I'm Richard, the night manager. Mitchell speaks highly of you. Thanks for the opportunity, sir. I appreciate it." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes. Well, beggars can't be choosers, can they? Either way, we're happy to have another body for the night shift." The way he said body made me uncomfortable. "When do I start?" "Tonight. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Mitchell will train you." Richard handed me a folded uniform. "There's a manual in there. Learn it, know it, live it." I nodded, taking the package. It felt heavier than it should have. "Oh, and Daniel?" Richard's voice dropped an octave. "We have certain ways of doing things here. Procedures that might seem peculiar, but they're essential. Follow them to the letter." His eyes locked with mine, unblinking. "The rules are there for a reason." Mitch gave a nervous laugh. "He's just big on protocol. Corporate stuff, you know." Richard's gaze lingered on me for another moment before he nodded curtly and returned to his office. "Is he always that intense?" I whispered to Mitch once the door closed. "Richard? He's all right. Just takes the job seriously." Mitch was fidgeting with his name tag. "Come on. I'll show you around before your shift." The tour was brief and unmemorable. Kitchen, storage, break room, bathrooms, standard fast food layout. The only thing that stood out was how obsessively clean everything was. Not just clean, but sterile, like an operating room. "You guys must have the health inspector from hell," I joked. Mitch didn't laugh. "We have inspections, but not from the health department." When I pressed him about what that meant, he changed the subject. Back in my car, I opened the package Richard had given me. The uniform was standard McDonald's attire, but underneath was a thin black binder labeled Night Shift Protocols, Driftwood Location. I flipped it open, expecting corporate boilerplate about food safety and customer service. The first page had a single sentence, printed in bold red letters. "These rules exist for your protection. Deviations will not be tolerated." Below were numbered rules. typed in a font that reminded me of old government documents. 1. All mirrors must be covered between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m. 2. If a customer orders something not on the menu, refer them to the specials book under the register. Never improvise. 3. Children who enter alone after midnight are not children. Follow Protocol 7B. 4. If the ice cream machine makes a clicking sound, unplug it immediately and call the manager. 5. The scratching in the walls is normal. Do not investigate. 6. If a customer says the sun is brightest at midnight, escort them to the freezer and call the emergency number. 7. Never, under any circumstances, look directly at the security cameras. The list went on for several pages, each rule stranger than the last. I laughed nervously, assuming it was some kind of initiation prank. I checked my phone to text Mitch and asked what the hell this was about, but there was no signal. Not low bars, no service at all. As I started my car to drive to my new rental, I glanced back at the McDonald's. In the upstairs window, a window I hadn't noticed during the tour and couldn't imagine a purpose for, I saw a figure standing perfectly still, watching me. I told myself it was just Richard, keeping an eye on the new guy. But as I pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was watching me wasn't Richard. And it definitely wasn't human. I spent the afternoon trying to convince myself the rule book was an elaborate prank. Small towns have strange senses of humor, right? Haze the new guy, make him paranoid, then laugh when he takes it seriously. I'd fallen for enough pranks in my life to recognize the pattern. But something about those rules felt genuine. The paper was worn at the corners, like it had been handled frequently, and some pages had what looked like rusty brown stains on them. My rental was a studio apartment above a closed-down hardware store on Main Street. The landlord, a skeletal old woman named Mrs. Baxter, had barely spoken as she handed me the keys. "Don't make noise after dark," was all she said before shuffling away. I tried to nap before my shift but couldn't sleep. The apartment was silent except for the occasional creak that old buildings make when settling. At least, that's what I told myself they were. At 10:30 p.m., I put on my uniform and drove back to McDonald's. The town was deserted. Not a single car on the road, not a single light in any window. It was as if the entire population of Driftwood disappeared after sunset. The McDonald's parking lot had 3 cars: Mitch's beat-up Corolla, Richard's immaculate Ford Explorer, and a rusted pickup truck I didn't recognize. The restaurant's lights were on, but the open 24 hours sign had been turned off. Mitch greeted me at the employee entrance, looking significantly more tired than he had earlier. "Ready for your first night?" he asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. "About that rule book. That's a joke, right?" Mitch's face fell. "Look, Danny, I should have warned you. I'm sorry, but just follow the rules, okay? Don't make waves. It's not worth it." "But they don't make any sense. Cover the mirrors? Children who aren't children? What the hell is that about?" "Keep your voice down," Mitch hissed, glancing nervously at the ceiling. "Richard doesn't like us discussing the protocols outside of training. This is insane. Is this some kind of cult?" Mitch grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "Listen to me very carefully. This job pays triple what you'd make at any other McDonald's. There's a reason for that. Follow the rules, collect your paycheck, and don't ask questions. That's how we survive here." The fear in his eyes was too raw to be faked. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Good," he said, releasing my arm. "First night is usually quiet. You'll be on register. I'll handle the kitchen." Inside, Richard was counting money in the office, while a beefy guy with neck tattoos mopped the floor. Mitch introduced him as Tucker, the overnight janitor. Tucker didn't say anything, just nodded slightly without making eye contact. "He doesn't talk much," Mitch explained as we moved to the front counter. "And don't bother trying to befriend him. He's not here to make friends." As Mitch was showing me the register, I noticed all the mirrors in the dining area were already covered with black cloth. The security cameras, which I hadn't paid much attention to earlier, were unusual. Older models with red lights that blinked steadily. I remembered rule number 7 and made a conscious effort not to look directly at them. We close the dining room at midnight, Mitch explained. Drive-through only after that. Makes things easier. Easier for what? Just easier, he said firmly. At 0 p.m., Richard emerged from his office. Everything set, Mitchell? Daniel knows his responsibilities? Yes, sir, we're all good. Richard nodded, his eyes lingering on me. Remember, Daniel, the rules are there for a reason. I got it. His expression darkened. Flippancy will not serve you well here. This is your only warning. As soon as Richard left, Mitch punched my arm. Don't antagonize him, man. Seriously. Sorry, I rubbed my arm. This place just has me on edge. It feels like you're all waiting for something bad to happen. We're not waiting for it, Mitch mumbled. We're just prepared for it. The first few hours were uneventful. A handful of customers came through, all locals, according to Mitch. They ordered normally, paid, and left without incident. Nothing strange, except for how quiet they were, barely speaking beyond their orders. At exactly midnight, Mitch locked the front doors and switched the sign to drive-through only. Now we follow the midnight protocols, he said, pulling out a laminated checklist from under the counter. First, check all the mirrors are covered. We walked through the restaurant, confirming each mirror was completely obscured. Even the small mirror in the employee bathroom had a cloth taped over it. Now we prepare the special orders book, Mitch said, retrieving a leather-bound ledger from a locked drawer under the register. If anyone orders something not on the menu, you look it up in here. Each special order has a code and preparation instructions. I flipped through the book. It contained hundreds of strange meals with bizarre names like the Midnight Sun, Orphan's Delight, and the Whistling Man. The preparation instructions were equally disturbing, with ingredients I'd never heard of and procedures that made no culinary sense. This can't be real food, I said, pointing to a recipe that called for 3 drops of the night manager's blood and whispers of forgotten children. It's just code, Mitch said quickly. Corporate language for specialty items. Nothing weird. Before I could argue, the drive-through alert dinged. Customer, Mitch said, clearly relieved by the interruption. I took my position at the register while Mitch stood nearby, watching intently. Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order? I said into the headset. There was no response, just a faint, rhythmic breathing. Hello? Can I take your order? The breathing continued for several seconds, then stopped abruptly. I'd like a Happy Meal, came a voice that made my skin crawl. It sounded like someone trying to mimic a human voice without quite understanding how human speech worked. Too deep, too hollow, with pauses in all the wrong places. Would you like that with a hamburger, cheeseburger, or nuggets? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I want what's on the other menu, the voice said. The special menu. For special children. I froze, looking at Mitch. His face had gone completely white. He grabbed the special orders book and flipped through it frantically, then pointed to an entry titled The Lost Child's Feast. According to the book, I was supposed to respond with a specific phrase, "The playground is closed, but we have other toys to share." I hesitated, but Mitch's terrified expression convinced me to play along. "The playground is closed, but we have other toys to share," I said into the headset. A horrible, gurgling laugh came through the speaker. "Good boy. Bring it out personally. I want to see your face." Mitch was already moving toward the kitchen, gesturing for me to follow. In the food prep area, he began assembling what looked like a normal Happy Meal box. But instead of placing food inside, he pulled a small cloth pouch from inside his shirt. "What is that?" I whispered. "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to," he replied, placing the pouch in the box and sealing it. "Take this to the window. Hand it over, then close the window immediately. Do not make conversation. Do not look at the driver for more than 3 seconds." My hands trembled as I took the box. "Mitch, what the fuck is going on? Do you want to make it through your first shift?" He looked deathly serious. "Then do exactly as I say." At the drive-through window, I could see a dark car idling, its windows tinted so heavily I couldn't make out the driver. I opened the window, held out the box, and immediately felt cold air rush in, far colder than the mild Oregon night warranted. A hand reached out to take the box, a human hand, but wrong somehow. The fingers too long, the skin too pale, the movements too fluid, like it had extra joints. I forced myself to drop the box into that hand and slammed the window shut. As the car pulled away, I caught a glimpse of the driver turning to look at me. Through the tinted glass, I could make out only a silhouette, but I swear its neck was too long, its head oddly shaped. "What the fuck did we just give them?" I demanded, turning to Mitch. "You don't want to know," he said quietly. "But you did good. You followed the protocol. This is insane. We need to call someone. The police, the health department, fucking anyone." "The police know," Mitch said, his voice flat. "Everyone in town knows. Why do you think we get paid so well? Why do you think no one quits?" He paused. "No one who survives anyway." I felt sick. What happens if you break the rules? Mitch pulled up his sleeve, revealing a series of deep scars along his forearm. I looked in a mirror at 3 a.m. my second week, just for a second. Didn't believe the rules were real. His eyes were hollow. Now I do. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and confusion. We had 2 more drive-through customers, both normal, thankfully. Tucker continued his silent cleaning, occasionally staring at me with an unreadable expression. At 4:30 a.m. the power flickered, and all the lights went out for exactly 10 seconds. When they came back on, Mitch was performing what looked like a bizarre ritual, placing salt in a specific pattern at each doorway. "Standard procedure for power outages," he explained, not meeting my eyes. "Keeps the health code violations away." By the time my shift ended at 7 a.m., I was a nervous wreck. The morning crew arrived, looking unnervingly well-rested and normal. They chatted and laughed as if the night shift was just like any other McDonald's in America. As I walked to my car, the morning sun felt like a blessing. Warm, normal, safe. But when I looked back at the restaurant, I saw Richard watching me from the upstairs window again, his face expressionless. "See you tonight, Daniel." I could have sworn I heard him say, though he was too far away for me to hear anything. Driving back to my apartment, I tried to make sense of what I'd experienced. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave Driftwood immediately, but another part, the curious, reckless part, wanted to know more. What were those rules really protecting us from? What happened to the employees who didn't follow them? And what exactly was in that Happy Meal we'd given to? Whatever that thing was in the drive-thru, I had a feeling I'd find out soon enough, whether I wanted to or not. I didn't sleep well that day. Every time I drifted off, I'd jolt awake, convinced I'd heard scratching at my window or whispers in the hallway. By the time I needed to get ready for my second shift, I'd managed maybe 2 hours of broken sleep. Just before leaving for work, I tried calling my sister in Portland. I needed to hear a normal voice, someone outside the bubble of insanity that was Driftwood. The call wouldn't go through. Neither would any other number I tried. My phone showed full bars, but acted like it was in airplane mode. I considered driving out of town just to clear my head, but something told me that would be a bad idea. Instead, I drove straight to McDonald's, arriving 20 minutes early. Richard was already there, having some kind of intense conversation with a man in a sheriff's uniform. They stopped talking the moment I walked in. "Ah, Daniel, eager to start your second shift?" Richard's tone was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "Just wanted to be punctual," I said, nodding to the sheriff. "This is Sheriff Grayson," Richard introduced us. "He likes to check in on our night operations occasionally." Sheriff Grayson was tall and gaunt, with a weathered face that looked like it had seen too much. His badge read Driftwood County Sheriff's Department, though I hadn't realized Driftwood was large enough to have its own county. "New blood," Grayson said, looking me up and down. "How was your first night, son?" "Interesting," I replied carefully. "Still learning the ropes." "Make sure you learn them well." The sheriff's gaze was penetrating. We've had some unfortunate incidents with employees who didn't respect the protocols. I'm a fast learner. Good. He turned to Richard. We'll talk more later about that situation from last week. Keep me updated. With a final glance at me, he left. What situation? I asked once he was gone. Richard's expression hardened. None of your concern. Clock in and review the rule book before your shift starts. Mitch arrived a few minutes later, looking worse than he had the night before. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he kept scratching at his arms nervously. Rough day? I asked as we prepared the register. Couldn't sleep. Keep having the dreams. What dreams? He shook his head. You'll get them too eventually. Just when you do, remember they're only dreams. Don't listen to the voices. Before I could press further, the front door chimed. A middle-aged woman walked in, wearing a floral dress that seemed out of place given the chilly evening. She moved stiffly, like her joints weren't working properly. Evening, Mrs. Fletcher. Mitch called out, his voice unnaturally cheerful. The usual? Mrs. Fletcher nodded, her head moving in an odd, jerky motion. When she spoke, her voice was slightly too high-pitched. Yes, please, Mitchell. The usual would be lovely. I watched as Mitch prepared a large coffee and a plain hamburger with no condiments or toppings. He placed them on a tray and handed it to Mrs. Fletcher, who hadn't approached the counter. Enjoy your meal, Mrs. Fletcher. Remember, dining room closes at midnight. She smiled, but it was wrong somehow. Too wide, showing too many teeth. Of course, dear. I know the rules. Mrs. Fletcher took her tray to a corner table and sat with her back to us. I noticed she didn't touch her food or drink. Regular customer? I asked quietly. Mitch nodded. Every night. Same order, same table. Never eats, never drinks. Then why does she come? We don't ask those questions, Mitch muttered. Mrs. Fletcher has been coming here every night for 15 years, according to Richard, long before I started. I glanced over at her again. She was sitting perfectly still, not moving at all. Is she breathing? Stop staring, Mitch hissed. Rule 15. Never observe a regular customer for more than 10 seconds continuously. I quickly looked away, focusing instead on wiping down the counter. Sorry, didn't read that far yet. Read the whole book tonight, I'm serious. As the evening progressed, a few more customers came in, all seemingly normal residents grabbing dinner. By 11:30 p.m., only Mrs. Parody. Fletcher remained in the dining area, still not having touched her food. At 11:45, Tucker arrived for his cleaning shift. He nodded at us and immediately went to Mrs. Fletcher's table. Evening, ma'am, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for such a tough-looking guy. Almost closing time for the dining room. Mrs. Fletcher turned her head, only her head, not her body, and smiled at Tucker. Of course, dear. Time for me to go home to my family. She stood up in one fluid motion, leaving her untouched meal on the table. As she walked past me toward the exit, she stopped suddenly. Sniffing the air, she leaned toward me. New blood, she whispered, her breath smelling of dirt and something metallic. Fresh, young. Her eyes, which I now noticed were slightly too far apart, studied my face. You won't last long. Before I could respond, she walked out the door, moving with that same awkward gait. What the fuck was that? I asked once she was gone. Tucker collected her untouched food, placing it in a separate bag rather than the regular trash. Mrs. Fletcher likes to mess with the new hires, he said. Don't let her get to you. It was the most I'd heard him speak, and his casual tone was somehow more unsettling than the encounter itself. At midnight, we followed the same protocol as the night before. Locking doors, checking mirrors, preparing the special orders book. Richard disappeared into his office, saying he had paperwork to take care of. So what's Tucker's deal? I asked Mitch when the janitor was out of earshot. He seems to know more than he lets on. Tucker's been here the longest, besides Richard. Started as a regular employee then. Something happened. Now he only works as the janitor, and never during daylight hours. What happened? Mitch lowered his voice. Story goes he broke Rule 23. Never enter the walk in freezer between 2:15 and 2:17 a.m. Whatever he saw in there. He hasn't spoken much since. I glanced at Tucker, who was methodically mopping the floor with a strange reddish cleaning solution that smelled like copper and bleach. Is that blood in his mop water? Mitch didn't answer, which was answer enough. Around 1:30 a.m., the drive-through alert sounded. A car that hadn't triggered the sensor pulled up to the speaker. "Your turn," Mitch said, nodding at the headset. I took a deep breath and put it on. "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order?" "Hello, Daniel." The voice was soft, almost musical, but with a strange echo, as if the speaker was in a massive empty room rather than a car. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." I froze, feeling the blood drain from my face. I hadn't introduced myself over the speaker. I hadn't spoken at all. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A low chuckle came through the headset. "I know all the new employees. I like to welcome them personally." Mitch was watching me, his expression tense. He pantomimed for me to continue with the protocol. "Can I take your order?" I managed to ask. "I'd like the McCarvis, please. Extra fresh." I looked frantically at Mitch, who was already flipping through the special orders book. He pointed to an entry and mouthed, "Say it." The response phrase listed was, "The fields are fallow, but our stores are full." "The fields are fallow, but our stores are full," I repeated into the headset, my mouth dry. "Excellent." The voice sounded pleased. "And Daniel, I look forward to seeing how long you last. My money's on 3 more shifts. Care to wager?" Before I could respond, Mitch yanked the headset off me. "We'll have your order ready at the window," he said briskly, then disconnected. "What the hell was that?" I demanded. "That was the regular," Mitch said, his face ashen. "Only shows up a few times a month. Only speaks to new employees. And what's a McCarvist?" Mitch was already moving toward the kitchen. "You don't want to know. Just stay at the register. I'll handle this one." I watched as Mitch went into the walk-in freezer, returning with a small red-stained package wrapped in butcher paper. He placed it in a normal McDonald's bag, then added what looked like several packets of salt and a small vial of clear liquid. "Take this to the window," he instructed. "Hand it over. Take the money and close the window immediately. Do not make conversation. Do not accept any gifts or offers." The drive-through window revealed a sleek black Cadillac idling outside. The windows were tinted completely black, illegal levels of tint, making it impossible to see the driver. With trembling hands, I passed the bag through the window. A hand emerged from the darkness to take it, a perfectly normal, human-looking hand, except for a strange symbol tattooed on the wrist. The same symbol I'd seen on page 1 of the rule book. "Thank you, Daniel," came that musical voice from inside the car. "You're doing well so far. Better than your predecessor." A $50 bill appeared in the hand. "Your payment." I took it cautiously. "That's too much. The order is only $7.65. The remainder is a tip for your future funeral expenses." The hand retreated, and the window rolled up before I could respond. The Cadillac pulled away silently, its taillights vanishing too quickly in the darkness. When I returned to the counter, Mitch was watching me with wide eyes. "What did it say to you?" "It tipped me for funeral expenses." Mitch cursed under his breath. "That's not good. The regular doesn't usually do that unless..." He trailed off. "Unless what?" "Unless it's chosen someone." The rest of the shift was mercifully quiet, though the sense of dread never left me. At one point, while Mitch was in the bathroom, I tried to peek through the blinds of Richard's office. Through a small gap, I could see him sitting at his desk, staring at what looked like a small shrine made of broken children's toys and dark red candles. At 4:15 a.m., the ice cream machine started making a clicking sound, like a mechanical cricket. Remembering Rule 4, I immediately unplugged it and called for Mitch. "Good catch," he said, looking genuinely relieved. "That was close. What would have happened if I hadn't unplugged it?" Mitch's eyes darted around nervously. Last time, the machine leaked this black sludge all over the floor. Tucker touched it while cleaning up. His hand. Mitch swallowed hard. Let's just say he's lucky only his hand was affected. I noticed then that Tucker always wore gloves, even when not cleaning. By the time 7 a.m. rolled around, I was mentally and physically exhausted. As the morning crew arrived, Richard emerged from his office, looking as fresh as if he'd slept soundly all night. "Daniel, a word before you leave?" He beckoned me into the hallway near the back exit. "How was your second shift?" he asked, his voice deceptively casual. "Fine," I lied. "No problems. I understand you met the regular tonight." I nodded, unsure what to say. "And what did you think?" "Think? I don't know what to think about any of this, to be honest." Richard studied my face carefully. "You're scared. That's good. Fear will keep you alive." He pulled a small object from his pocket. A tiny wooden carving of an arch that looked like the McDonald's logo, but with strange symbols etched into it. "Keep this with you at all times," he said, pressing it into my palm, "especially when you sleep." "What is it?" "Protection. Of sorts." His eyes met mine, and for just a moment I thought I saw genuine concern there. The regular doesn't usually take such an immediate interest in new employees. "Be careful, Daniel. The rules aren't just corporate policy. They're the only thing standing between us and them." "Who's them?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Richard's expression darkened. "The customers," he said simply, then turned and walked away. As I drove home in the early morning light, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a black Cadillac following me. The wooden charm Richard had given me sat heavy in my pocket. When I reached my apartment, there was a small paper bag hanging on my doorknob. Inside was a McDonald's Happy Meal box. Not thinking clearly, I opened it. Instead of food, there was a crude doll made of what looked like human hair and chicken bones. Its face a photograph of me, one taken through my apartment window while I was sleeping. Underneath was a note written in what appeared to be dried blood. "3 more shifts, Daniel. I never lose a bet." I didn't tell Mitch about the Happy Meal box. I couldn't bear to see the fear in his eyes, couldn't stomach hearing him tell me how fucked I was. Instead, I burned the doll in my bathtub, watching as the chicken bones blackened and the hair shriveled with a sickening smell. The photograph of me curled at the edges before disappearing into ash. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the day poring over the rule book, memorizing every bizarre instruction. Some seemed outright nonsensical, like Rule 37. If a bird perches on the drive-through sign for more than 2 minutes, serve no chicken products for the next hour. Others were disturbingly specific, like Rule 42. If a customer's eyes reflect light as green instead of red, activate the silent alarm and evacuate through the west exit only. By my third night, I was operating on pure caffeine and adrenaline. Richard seemed to notice my deteriorating state when I arrived, but made no comment beyond a slightly raised eyebrow. "Tucker called in sick," he informed me. "You'll need to handle his cleaning duties in addition to your regular responsibilities." "Tucker gets sick?" I asked before I could stop myself. Somehow, the idea of the stoic janitor succumbing to something as mundane as illness seemed impossible. Richard's mouth twitched. "Not in the way you're thinking. He's indisposed. It happens occasionally after he interacts with certain customers." I remembered Tucker's brief conversation with Mrs. Fletcher and shuddered. The first few hours of the shift passed without incident. Mitch seemed unusually quiet, flinching at small noises and repeatedly checking his phone, which, like mine, showed service but couldn't make calls. "Everything okay?" I asked during a lull. "My sister," he said, his voice strained. "She lives on the other side of town. Called my landline earlier today. Said she thought someone was watching her house. I told her to come stay with me, but she hasn't shown up. Could she have left town?" Mitch gave me a look. "Nobody leaves Driftwood after dark. Not if they want to make it past the town line." I thought about asking what he meant, but his expression warned me not to. At midnight, we followed the standard protocols. locking doors, covering mirrors, preparing the special orders book. Given Tucker's absence, I was tasked with mopping the dining area. As I worked, I noticed faint markings on the floor beneath the tables. Symbols similar to the one on the regular's wrist, drawn in what looked like faded, rusty brown. The same color as the stains in the rule book. "Mitch," I called quietly, "what are these markings on the floor?" He glanced over nervously. "Protection circles. Tucker maintains them every night. Don't disturb them, whatever you do." I carefully mopped around the symbols, making sure not to smudge them. Around 1 a.m., a loud bang came from the back of the restaurant. Mitch and I both jumped. "What was that?" I whispered. "Probably just the freezer settling," Mitch said, though he didn't sound convinced. "I'll check it out. I'll come with you." "No!" His vehemence surprised me. "Someone has to stay at the front. Rule 19, never leave the counter unattended after midnight." I reluctantly stayed put while Mitch went to investigate. Minutes passed with no sign of him. The silence in the restaurant grew oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerators and the steady drip of the leaky faucet in the back. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, 3 times, before stabilizing again. I grabbed the rule book from under the counter, frantically searching for what to do in case of electrical issues. Rule 53. If lights flicker 3 times in succession, place salt in a circle around the register and recite the Founder's Pledge. Salt was kept in a container beneath the register for just this purpose. I quickly poured it in a circle around my station, then flipped to the inside back cover where the Founder's Pledge was printed in faded type. From golden arches to midnight skies, we serve all who hunger, we satisfy all who thirst. The bargain holds, the boundary stands. The debt is paid until the final day. As I finished reciting the strange pledge, the temperature in the restaurant plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the windows despite it being a mild spring night. "Mitch?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Mitch, where are you?" No response. The drive-thru alert suddenly dinged, making me jump. I hesitated, then put on the headset. "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order?" Static crackled through the speaker, then a sound that might have been breathing, or something more liquid, like gurgling. "Hello?" I tried again. "Can I take your order?" More static, then a voice that sounded like Mitch, but distorted, as if speaking underwater. "Daniel. Help. Freezer. Don't." The transmission cut off abruptly. Every instinct told me to stay put, to follow the rules, to wait for Richard to emerge from his office. But this was Mitch, my cousin, the only person in this town who'd shown me any real kindness. I stepped out of the salt circle and hurried toward the back. The hallway leading to the freezer was darker than it should have been, the overhead lights dimmer, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently of anything physical. The temperature dropped further as I approached the walk-in freezer. "Mitch?" I called out. "Are you in there?" A muffled thump came from inside the freezer, like something heavy falling. I checked my watch. 2:16 a.m. Rule 23. Never enter the walk. In freezer between 2:15 and 2:17 a.m. 1 minute. I could wait 1 minute to follow the rules. Another thump, louder this time, followed by what sounded like a choked scream. "Fuck the rules." I yanked open the freezer door. Cold air billowed out, along with a smell that had no place in a fast food restaurant. Damp earth, decay, and something coppery and wet. The freezer lights were flickering rapidly, creating a strobe effect that made the scene before me even more nightmarish. Mitch was pinned against the back wall, hovering about 3 feet off the ground. No visible force was holding him there, but his body was contorted in a way that human bodies don't bend. His head twisted nearly backwards to face me. But the face, it wasn't Mitch's face anymore. The features were rippling and shifting, like something under his skin was trying to push its way out. Daniel. His voice stuttered unnaturally. Run, not me anymore. Standing in the center of the freezer was a figure that, at first glance, appeared to be Sheriff Grayson. But as the lights flickered, the glamour seemed to slip. revealing glimpses of something tall and emaciated, with too many joints and gray, papery skin. It turned toward me, and I saw its eyes, bulbous, reflective, and glowing a sickly green in the strobe lighting. Rule 42 flashed through my mind. If a customer's eyes reflect light as green instead of red, activate the silent alarm and evacuate through the west exit only. But this was no customer, and I was frozen in place, unable to run, unable even to scream. The thing wearing Grayson's shape smiled, its mouth stretching wider than any human mouth could. "Daniel Pierce," it said in that same musical voice I'd heard from the regular. "Breaking the rules already? I'm going to win our bet sooner than I thought." It stepped toward me, movements jerky and wrong, like watching a spider walk on its hind legs. "Your cousin broke the rules too," it continued conversationally. "Came looking for his sister. She's been quite delicious company." Behind it, Mitch made a horrible gurgling sound, his body convulsing against the wall. "What are you doing to him?" I managed to choke out. "Changing him, improving him, making him one of us." The thing cocked its head at an impossible angle. "Would you like to see?" It gestured languidly, and Mitch's body dropped to the floor with a sickening thud. He lay still for a moment, then began to move, twitching and jerking, his limbs bending at unnatural angles as he rose to his feet. His head was still twisted almost completely backward, but now he was smiling. A terrible stretch smile that split his face nearly in half. His eyes had gone completely black, leaking a thick, dark fluid down his cheeks. "Daniel," he said, his voice a wet, bubbling parody of itself, "it doesn't hurt anymore. You should join us." I backed away, fumbling for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a heavy metal shelf bracket that had come loose from the wall. "You can't fight us, Daniel," the Grayson thing said, sounding almost disappointed. "We've been here long before the restaurant, long before this town. We're just using their facilities." "What are you?" I whispered. "Hungry," it replied simply. "Always hungry. And places like this," it gestured around the freezer, "are perfect feeding grounds. So many people coming and going, rarely missed. A perfect arrangement." Mitch took a shambling step toward me. "Join us, Danny. It's better than fighting, better than running." I gripped the shelf bracket tighter. "Stay back, Mitch. I don't want to hurt you." The thing that had been Sheriff Grayson laughed, a sound like bones being ground together. "You can't hurt him anymore. He's beyond pain, beyond humanity. He's becoming like us. Soon, he'll be hungry too." I glanced at my watch. 2:18 a.m. The time restriction in the rule had passed. Did that matter anymore? I'd already broken one of the most important rules. As if reading my thoughts, the creature smiled again. "The rules are fascinating, aren't they? A little game we play with Richard and his predecessors. A bargain of sorts. They feed us at regular intervals, maintain the boundaries, and in return, we don't take everyone." It shrugged. An oddly human gesture from something so clearly inhuman. Most of the time. Mitch lurched forward suddenly, faster than I expected. His hands, now sporting elongated fingers with too many joints, clutched at my uniform. "So hungry, Danny," he gurgled, his face inches from mine. The smell coming from him was unbearable, rot and copper and something chemical. I swung the shelf bracket in panic, connecting solidly with the side of Mitch's head. There was a crack, and black fluid sprayed across my face. Mitch staggered, but didn't fall. "That wasn't very nice, cousin," he said, his head now hanging at an even more impossible angle, connected to his neck by what looked like stretchy gray sinew rather than bone. "We're family." The Grayson thing watched with apparent amusement. "He still remembers you. Isn't that sweet? The memories fade eventually, but the newer ones, they hold on to pieces of themselves for a while." I backed toward the freezer door, keeping the shelf bracket raised. "What do you want from me?" "Want?" The creature seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "We want what we always want, to feed, to grow, to replace." It gestured at Mitch. "Some we change, others we simply Consume. It took a step toward me, and in the flickering light, its disguise slipped further. Sheriff Grayson's features melting away to reveal a face that was hardly a face at all. Just a assemblage of holes and protrusions arranged in a mockery of human features. Richard has been holding out on us, it continued, not providing the quality we expect. So we've been improvising, taking staff when the offerings are inadequate. I was at the freezer door now, my free hand finding the handle behind me. You won't make it to the exit, the creature said mildly. Even if you get past us, there are others in the restaurant now. They came when you broke the circle at the register, when you ignored the rules. Daniel, another voice spoke from behind me. Richard's voice, calm and steady. Step out of the freezer, now. I didn't dare turn my back on the creatures, but I could hear Richard just outside the door. You're too late, manager, the Grayson thing said, its tone almost respectful. We've already begun the change with this one. It nodded toward Mitch. And this one, it looked at me, has broken your precious rules. Step out, Daniel, Richard repeated, his voice firmer. I shuffled backward through the door, keeping my eyes on Mitch and the creature. As soon as I was clear, Richard slammed the freezer door shut and slid a strange-looking metal rod through the handles, not a regular part of the freezer's locking mechanism. The rod was inscribed with symbols similar to those on the floor and in the rulebook. That won't hold them for long, Richard said grimly. We need to get to my office. Through the small window in the freezer door, I could see Mitch and the creature watching us, neither making a move to escape. The Grayson thing raised a hand in what almost seemed like a friendly wave. What about Mitch? We can't just leave him. That's not Mitch anymore. Richard cut me off. Your cousin is gone. That thing is just wearing his skin, his memories. But there's no time. Richard grabbed my arm, pulling me down the hallway. They'll be through that door in minutes, and they're not the only ones who came when you broke the protection circle. As if to punctuate his warning, a loud crash came from the front of the restaurant, followed by the sound of breaking glass. What's happening? I gasped as we ran. You broke the rules, Daniel, Richard said, his voice tight with controlled fear. You invited them in. Now we're experiencing what we in the business call a total containment breach. We reached his office, and Richard shoved me inside before following and locking the door with 3 separate locks. The small shrine I'd glimpsed earlier was still on his desk, but now the candles were lit, casting an eerie red glow over the room. What are these things? What do they want? Richard moved quickly around the office, pulling items from drawers and cabinets. Salt, more of the wooden symbols like the one he'd given me. What looked like a very old gun, with strange modifications to its barrel and grip. They've been here since before driftwood existed, he explained, his voice tight but controlled. The native tribes in this area called them the Hungry Ones, beings that could take human form but imperfectly. They feed on flesh, fear, and something more essential. Your soul, spirit, life force, whatever you want to call it. And McDonald's? What? Made a deal with them? Richard barked a harsh laugh. Not McDonald's corporate, you idiot. This isn't actually a real McDonald's. Never has been. It's a containment facility disguised as one. Been operating since the 1970s. That explained why everything felt slightly off about the restaurant. It was a facade, a shell built to look like a fast food chain while serving a much darker purpose. The rules are binding, Richard finished. Literal binding spells, designed to keep them contained and control when and how they feed. Breaking the rules breaks the bindings. Another crash from outside, closer this time. Something heavy slammed against the office door, making the hinges creak. So what do we do now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Richard handed me this strange gun. We follow the contingency protocol. Rule 73. I hadn't read that far yet. Which is, in case of total containment breach, destroy the facility. Richard's eyes were dead serious. We have to burn it down, Daniel, with everything inside it. Through the door, I could hear inhuman voices calling my name, including one that still sounded disturbingly like Mitch. Daniel, come out. We're so hungry." I looked at the gun in my hand, then back at Richard. "What about you? What about the town?" "The town is mostly theirs already," he said quietly. "Has been for decades. Most of the residents aren't human anymore, just good at pretending. The real humans are either in on the arrangement or too scared to leave." He moved to the shrine on his desk, picking up a small vial of dark liquid. "This is my post. I stay until the end. Someone has to ensure the containment protocols are re-established after the purge. And me? You get out through the emergency exit in the floor." He pointed to a trapdoor I hadn't noticed before. "Take the tunnels all the way to the edge of town. Don't stop. Don't look back. When you reach the boundary stone, a large rock with symbols carved into it, fire this gun straight up. One shot. That activates the purge protocol." "What does the purge do?" Richard's expression was grim. "Burns everything inside the containment zone to ash. Temporarily weakens them enough that the binding can be re-established." "But the town isn't real," Richard snapped. "Nothing here is real except the hunger and the rules. Now go before they break through." The pounding on the door intensified, the wood beginning to splinter. "What about you?" I asked again. Richard dipped his fingers in the vial of dark liquid, then began drawing symbols on his forehead. "I'll hold them off as long as I can. Give you time to reach the boundary." His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw genuine emotion there, a mix of fear, resignation, and grim determination. "Go, Daniel. Someone has to break this cycle or they'll just keep feeding, keep growing." I moved toward the trapdoor, then hesitated. How many managers before you?" "Hundreds," Richard said quietly, "dating back to when this was just a trading post in the 1800s. Different facades, same purpose." The door cracked further, a long, grayish appendage pushing through the gap. "Go," Richard shouted, raising his hands, which now glowed with a dull red light similar to the candles. "And Daniel, don't trust anyone you meet on the way. Not everyone in the tunnels is on our side." I pulled open the trapdoor, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. The last thing I saw before climbing down was Richard standing before the shattered door, chanting in a language that hurt my ears as inhuman shapes pushed their way into the office. Among them was Mitch, or what had been Mitch, his body now so contorted it barely resembled anything human, his face split in a grin that literally divided his head in half. The trapdoor slammed shut above me, plunging me into darkness with only a strange gun, a wooden charm, and the terrible knowledge that I was trapped in a town full of monsters, and I had just broken all the rules that kept them at bay. The ladder descended into darkness, so complete I couldn't see my own hands. The sounds of chaos above faded as I climbed lower, replaced by the steady drip of water and my own ragged breathing. After what felt like minutes of descent, my feet touched solid ground. The tunnel was damp and smelled of mold and something else, that same coppery scent that had pervaded the restaurant. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, the screen's glow illuminating rough-hewn walls glistening with moisture. The passage extended in both directions, disappearing into blackness. No signs, no indicators of which way led out of town. I tried to orient myself, recalling the layout of driftwood from my drives around town. If the McDonald's was on the eastern edge, I needed to head east to reach the boundary. But which way was east down here? I stood paralyzed by indecision until a distant scream echoed from the direction I'd come. From above, Richard. The sound galvanized me into action. I chose the right-hand tunnel and began moving, my phone's weak light barely penetrating the gloom. The walls were strange, not quite stone, not quite concrete. In places, they seemed almost organic, with patterns that resembled sinew and muscle tissue. I tried not to look too closely, focusing instead on putting distance between myself and whatever was happening at the McDonald's. After walking for what felt like half an hour, I encountered a junction, 3 identical passages branching off in different directions. No markings, no clues. I was contemplating my options when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound from the leftmost tunnel, like breathing, but wetter. Something was down here with me. I froze, killing my phone's light. In the absolute darkness, the breathing grew louder, accompanied by a soft, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across wet stone. I backed away from the sound, moving blindly toward the rightmost passage. My back hit the wall, and I bit back a cry as something warm and sticky clung to my uniform. The wall felt soft, yielding, almost like it was pressing back against me. I lurched forward, fumbling for the gun Richard had given me. It was heavy and cold, the metal engraved with the same strange symbols I'd seen throughout the McDonald's. The breathing was closer now. In the pitch blackness, I sensed rather than saw something massive moving toward the junction. I could smell it, like meat left too long in the sun, mixed with that same chemical stink that had emanated from the transformed Mitch. I needed light, needed to see what I was facing, but turning on my phone would immediately reveal my position. A scraping sound, much closer now. Something dragging along the wall, just around the corner from where I stood. I made a split-second decision, turning on my phone and immediately throwing it as far as I could down the middle passage. The screen briefly illuminated what looked like a man-sized slug, its surface rippling with dozens of human faces, all silently screaming. The creature whipped toward the light, revealing a gaping maw lined with concentric rings of teeth. I didn't wait to see more. As the thing surged toward my phone, I dashed into the rightmost tunnel, running blind, one hand on the unnervingly soft wall to guide me. Behind me, I heard my phone being crushed, followed by an inhuman shriek of frustration. The darkness was absolute now. I ran until my lungs burned, stumbling over uneven ground, the splashing of my footsteps in shallow puddles echoing off the walls. Eventually, I had to stop, gasping for breath in the stinking air. How was I supposed to navigate these tunnels? How would I know when I reached the boundary stone? Richard's instructions now seemed woefully inadequate. As my breathing steadied, I became aware of another sound, faint but distinct. Music, a tinny, distorted version of what sounded like the McDonald's jingle. I moved cautiously toward the sound, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. But what choice did I have? It was the only reference point in this lightless labyrinth. The tunnel curved, and ahead, a faint glow appeared, sickly green light that cast long shadows against the walls. The music grew louder, now accompanied by a crackly voice that sounded like it was coming through an ancient drive-through speaker. "Welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order?" I slowed my approach, gripping the strange gun with sweaty hands. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, the source of the green light revealed. An ancient McDonald's sign, the kind from the 1970s, embedded in the wall like some twisted religious icon. Below it stood what at first glance appeared to be a counter with a register, staffed by a figure in a McDonald's uniform. "Hello, Daniel," the figure said, its voice that same staticky drive-through quality. "What can I get for you today?" As I drew closer, I saw that the employee wasn't human. It had the general shape of a person, but its features were blurred, like a photograph that wouldn't come into focus. Its uniform was decades out of date, stained with what I desperately hoped wasn't blood. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, keeping my distance from the counter. "What is this place?" The figure's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "I'm the first employee," it said, its voice clearer now. "The first. Sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" "To keep them contained." The figure gestured around vaguely. "We make the deals. We enforce the rules, even in death." I took a tentative step closer, the gun raised. "I'm trying to get to the boundary stone. Do you know the way?" The figure made a sound like static that might have been laughter. "Everyone wants out. Few make it." It pointed to a tunnel entrance on the far side of the chamber. "That way leads out. But first, you must pay." "Pay? I don't have any money." "Not money." The figure's featureless face seemed to ripple. "Information. What happens above? Has the breach begun?" I nodded. "Yes. They got Mitch, my cousin. Richard sent me to activate something called the Purge Protocol. The figure went still. The Purge. After all these years, Richard finally broke. He said it would burn everything and weaken them enough to reestablish containment. More of that static laughter. Burn. Yes. Contain. No. The figure leaned forward over the counter, its form growing more distinct as it did so, revealing a face that was now horribly familiar. Richard lied to you, Daniel. It was my face staring back at me from the creature's head. My features, but wrong somehow, stretched and distorted like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. What are you? I whispered, backing away. I told you. The first sacrifice. They take your shape, your memories, yourself. It gestured to the tunnel it had indicated earlier. Go ahead. Escape. Ring the alarm. Start the purge. Its grin was my own, but too wide. Too many teeth. Then you'll see the truth. I kept the gun trained on the creature as I edged toward the tunnel entrance. What truth? What does the purge really do? Feeds them. The thing wearing my face was fading now, becoming transparent. All at once, the whole town. A feast that happens. Once a generation. Then the cycle begins again. You're lying, I said, though uncertainty gnawed at me. Richard wouldn't sacrifice an entire town. Richard is, like me, a keeper, a warden. Not human. Not anymore. The figure was barely visible now, just a suggestion of shape behind the counter. Ask yourself, why he stayed behind? Why he's been here so long? Before I could respond, the green light flickered and died, plunging me back into darkness. The music and the creature vanished with it, leaving me alone with my doubts. I stood in the darkness, Richard's gun heavy in my hand. What if the creature was telling the truth? What if the purge wasn't about containing the entities, but feeding them a controlled culling of the town to sate their hunger for another generation? But if I didn't activate the purge, what would happen? The creatures would continue spreading, taking more people like they'd taken Mitch. Either way, people would die. I had no good options, only the path forward. I continued through the tunnel the creature had indicated, using the wooden charm Richard had given me to feel my way along the wall. The soft, organic quality of the tunnel walls grew more pronounced the further I went, pulsing slightly beneath my fingers like something alive. Time became meaningless in the darkness. I might have been walking for minutes or hours when I heard voices ahead, human voices, speaking urgently in hushed tones. I approached cautiously, seeing the flicker of what looked like candlelight around a bend in the tunnel. Pressing myself against the wall, I peered around the corner. A small group of people, actual humans, as far as I could tell, were huddled in a widened section of the tunnel. They had created a makeshift camp with blankets and supplies. A lantern sat in the center of their circle, illuminating frightened faces. Can't stay here much longer, a man was saying. He was middle-aged, wearing what looked like a postal worker's uniform. The breach is spreading. They'll find us. Where else can we go, Frank? Replied an elderly woman. The tunnels are our only safe place when this happens. Safe for now, said another man. And with a shock, I recognized Tucker, the janitor. His hands were still gloved, but his face was streaked with dirt and what looked like blood. But if Pierce actually triggers the purge, nowhere will be safe. At the mention of my name, I shifted slightly, causing a small stone to skitter across the ground. The group went silent immediately, all eyes turning toward my hiding spot. Come out, Tucker called, raising what looked like a shotgun. Slowly. I considered running, but knew I'd never outpace a bullet in these narrow tunnels. Keeping Richard's gun pointed downward, I stepped into the light. Daniel, Tucker lowered his weapon slightly. You made it out. No thanks to you, I said, keeping my distance. You knew what was happening, what those things were. You could have warned me. Tucker's expression hardened. Would you have believed me, or would you have thought I was just the crazy janitor with conspiracy theories? Fair point. I probably wouldn't have believed him. How many of you are there? I asked, looking at the small group. I counted 7 people total, including Tucker. We're what's left of the resistance, the elderly woman said. The real humans in Driftwood who know the truth. And what is the truth? I kept my hand on Richard's gun, not fully trusting anyone. About the purge? About Richard? About all of this? They exchanged glances. Then Tucker sighed. Show him, Margaret. The elderly woman reached into a bag and pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. This belonged to the first manager, she explained, opening it carefully. Before Richard, before this place was even a McDonald's, it details the original pact. She handed me the journal, and I skimmed it in the dim light. The entries dated back to 1847, written in a cramped, precise hand. They told a chilling story. Settlers discovering the entities in the caves beneath what would become Driftwood, making a bargain with them to ensure their own survival. They were starving, Margaret explained as I read. A harsh winter, cut off from other settlements. The things in the caves offered them food, warmth, protection, in exchange for occasional sacrifices. Human sacrifices, I murmured, looking up from the journal. They fed their own people to these things. Tucker nodded grimly. At first, just criminals, outcasts. Then anyone who asked too many questions. Eventually, they established a pattern, a controlled feeding through rituals and rules, with a major culling once every generation, the purge. And Richard? Not human, Tucker confirmed what the creature in the tunnel had suggested. Not anymore. The manager position is passed down to someone willing to become like them, partly changed, a hybrid who can maintain the rules that keep the feeding controlled. So the rules aren't to keep them contained, I said, the horrible truth dawning on me. They're to keep the feeding regulated, to make sure they don't take too many at once. Exactly, said Frank, the postal worker. The McDonald's is just the latest front. Before that, it was a diner, and before that, a general store. Always a place where people come and go, where strangers stopping for food wouldn't be missed. I looked down at the gun Richard had given me. So, this doesn't trigger some containment protocol. It signals the start of the feast. Tucker nodded. That's why we're hiding. The purge isn't selective. It drives the entire town into a feeding frenzy. They take everyone they can. Then why would Richard send me to activate it? Why not do it himself? Because it needs human intent, Margaret explained. Pure human intent. Richard is too far gone. You heard the emergency signal, didn't you? A sound like screaming through the drive-through speaker? I hadn't heard any emergency signal, but I nodded anyway, not wanting to admit how easily I'd been manipulated. So what do we do now? I asked, looking around at the group of survivors. We can't stay in these tunnels forever. Tucker's expression was grim. We have a plan. The entities are strongest at the restaurant, their main feeding ground. But they have a vulnerability. Their physical forms can be destroyed by a specific combination of salt, iron, and fire. But there are too many of them, Frank added. We've never had enough people to mount a real offense. We pick them off one by one when we can, but it's a losing battle. Until now, Tucker said, a gleam in his eye. The breach changes things. They're overextended, exposed. If we can reach the central chamber beneath the restaurant, we can burn out the nest. And how do we do that? Tucker gestured to several homemade bombs arranged carefully in a corner of their camp. We've been preparing for years, gathering supplies, making weapons. I looked at the improvised explosives, then back at the small group of haggard survivors. You're talking about taking on an unknown number of these things with some pipe bombs and shotguns? Do you have a better idea? Tucker challenged. Besides triggering the purge and dooming everyone in Driftwood? I didn't. I looked down at Richard's gun again, wondering if I should tell them about the boundary stone, about Richard's instructions. But something held me back. A suspicion that there was more to this story, that I wasn't getting the full truth from either side. What about the customers? I asked suddenly. The ones who come through the drive-thru at night, the ones who order from the special menu, what are they? Another exchange of glances among the group. Collaborators, Margaret finally said. Humans who made their own deals. They bring sacrifices, deliver messages, maintain the facade of normalcy in exchange for protection, longevity, power. Like Mrs. Fletcher, I murmured, remembering the strange woman who had never touched her food. One of the oldest, Tucker confirmed. Been in Driftwood for over 100 years, though she only looks 60. She's their eyes in the town, watches for troublemakers. And the regular, I asked. The one who knew my name, who left me that doll? Tucker's expression darkened. We don't speak of that one, he said quietly. It's different from the others. Older, more powerful. The group fell silent, the lantern flickering and casting long shadows against the tunnel walls. In that moment of quiet, I heard it, a distant, wet sound, like something massive dragging itself through the tunnels. They found us, Frank whispered, grabbing his backpack. We need to move. Now. Tucker was already distributing weapons to the group. Shotguns, makeshift spears with metal tips, bottles of what looked like homemade napalm. Here, he said, handing me a backpack. Supplies, maps of the tunnels, extra ammunition. Whatever happens, do not use Richard's gun, unless you're at the boundary stone. That thing is keyed to your DNA now. Firing it anywhere else won't start the purge, but it will alert every one of those things to your exact location. I took the backpack, the weight of it reassuring. What's the plan? We split up, Tucker said grimly. Makes us harder to track. Margaret knows the way to the central chamber. You go with her and Frank. The rest of us will create a diversion, draw them away. A suicide mission, I realized aloud. Tucker didn't deny it. Someone has to make it to the chamber. Someone has to end this. The dragging sound grew louder, accompanied now by a chorus of wet, clicking noises, like dozens of mouths opening and closing. Go, Tucker urged, positioning himself at the tunnel entrance with his shotgun. And Daniel, if you see anything wearing a familiar face down here, don't hesitate. It's not who you think it is. Margaret grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the opposite tunnel exit. Come on, boy. We don't have much time. As Frank extinguished the lantern, plunging us back into darkness, I heard Tucker chamber a round in his shotgun. See you on the other side, he said quietly. Or not. We fled into the darkness as the sounds of the approaching creatures grew louder behind us. The last thing I heard before we turned a corner was Tucker's shotgun firing, the blast echoing through the tunnels, followed by an inhuman shriek of pain and rage. The real fight for Driftwood had begun, and I was trapped in the middle of it, with nothing but a backpack of supplies, a gun I couldn't fire, and the sinking feeling that I was being manipulated by forces I still didn't fully understand. But one thing was clear now. I couldn't trigger the purge. Whatever Richard's true agenda, condemning an entire town, even one as strange and compromised as Driftwood, wasn't an option I could live with. As we ran through the lightless tunnels, guided only by Margaret's seemingly instinctive knowledge of the path, I made a decision. I would help these people reach the central chamber. I would fight these entities on their own ground. And if I survived, I would make sure no one ever filled out a job application at the Driftwood McDonald's again. We moved through the tunnels as quickly as we dared, guided by Margaret's uncanny sense of direction. Frank brought up the rear, a crude flamethrower fashioned from a weed sprayer clutched in his trembling hands. The sounds of Tucker's last stand had long since faded, replaced by the ambient dripping of water and our own labored breathing. How much further? I whispered as we paused at another junction. Margaret had produced a small red LED light that cast just enough glow to see a few feet ahead without broadcasting our position too obviously. Not far now, she murmured, consulting a hand-drawn map. 2 more turns, then we reach the old mine shaft that leads to the central chamber. You seem to know these tunnels well, I observed, studying her face in the dim red light. Something flickered across her expression. Pride, perhaps, or something darker. I should. I helped dig some of them back in the day. Back in what day? I asked. You don't look old enough to have been digging mine shafts." Margaret's thin lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Appearances can be deceiving in Driftwood, Daniel. I've been fighting these creatures for over 50 years. I did the math in my head. Margaret appeared to be in her 70s, which meant she would have been in her 20s when she started fighting the entities. It was possible, but something in her tone made me uneasy. "Why did you stay?" I asked. "Why not just leave town? Some of us can't leave." Frank interjected from behind. "Once you know about them, once you've seen them, they mark you somehow. Cross the town line, and you start to change." "Like Mitch," I murmured, remembering my cousin's transformed state. Margaret nodded grimly. "The only ones who can leave safely are those who don't know, the innocent, the ignorant, or those who've made certain arrangements. Like the collaborators," I said. "The ones who bring sacrifices." "Precisely." Margaret turned down a narrow side tunnel, forcing us to proceed in single file. "Once you're marked, you have 3 choices: serve them, fight them, or become them." The implications of those options hung heavy in the damp air as we continued our descent. The tunnels were changing character, the walls now unmistakably organic, pulsing slightly with what looked like veins carrying dark fluid. The floor had become softer, yielding beneath our feet like flesh rather than stone. "We're getting close," Margaret whispered. "The living tunnels always surround the central chamber." "Living tunnels?" I asked, trying not to think about what we were walking through. "Their digestive system, essentially," she explained matter-of-factly. "These passages process what they consume, extract what they need." I suddenly felt nauseous, remembering the soft, sticky sensation when I touched the wall earlier. "You mean we're inside them?" In a manner of speaking, they've become part of the land itself over the centuries. The town, the tunnels, the caves, it's all connected, one massive organism with many mouths. That explained the strange atmosphere of Driftwood, the sensation that the entire town was somehow watching, waiting. It wasn't paranoia. The place itself was alive and aware. We turned a final corner and came upon what had once been a mining elevator shaft. The ancient wooden framework was still mostly intact, though the elevator itself was long gone. A precarious-looking ladder provided the only way down into the darkness below. "That's our entrance," Margaret said, pointing into the shaft. "The central chamber is about 100 feet down." I peered over the edge, the feeble red light revealing nothing but blackness below. "How do we know they're not waiting for us down there?" "We don't," Frank admitted, checking his flamethrower nervously. "But Tucker's diversion should have drawn most of them away." Margaret began distributing the makeshift incendiary devices from her bag. "Each of us takes 3 bombs. We place them at the junction points of the chamber, where the major pathways converge. Frank's flamethrower should handle any resistance we encounter." "And once the bombs are placed," I asked, "we have 10-minute fuses. Primitive, but reliable. Should give us enough time to reach the emergency exit tunnel that leads to the old church." The plan seemed straightforward enough, but something still bothered me. It had almost been too easy to get here. If these creatures had been hunting us, why hadn't they found us yet? If they were as powerful as everyone claimed, why hadn't they sensed our approach? "Ready?" Margaret asked, already lowering herself onto the ladder. I nodded, though my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. With no better options, I followed Margaret down the shaft, Frank bringing up the rear. The descent felt eternal. The ladder creaked ominously under our weight, and several times I felt rungs wobble beneath my feet. The walls of the shaft transitioned fully from stone to that same organic material, pulsing visibly now even in the dim red light. In places, the walls seemed to reach out, protuberances, swaying gently like sea anemones. "Don't touch the growths," Margaret warned when she saw me staring. "They paralyze on contact." Finally, my feet touched solid ground. We stood in a small antechamber, its ceiling low enough that Frank had to stoop. A dark, arched passageway led forward, emitting a warm, humid breeze that carried that now familiar coppery scent. "The central chamber lies beyond," Margaret whispered, extinguishing her light. "From here on, we move in darkness. The creatures that guard the chamber can sense light, but are completely blind otherwise. Great. More stumbling through pitch blackness. Stay close, follow the sound of my footsteps, and for God's sake, don't make any loud noises, she instructed. We moved forward, the darkness absolute. I kept one hand extended before me, the other clutching one of Tucker's improvised bombs. The passage widened gradually, the ceiling rising until the confined feeling dissipated. The air grew warmer, more humid, the smell stronger. Not just copper now, but a mixture of scents I couldn't identify, both sweet and putrid. Margaret's footsteps stopped ahead. "We're here," she breathed, barely audible. I strained my eyes in the darkness, seeing nothing. Then, gradually, I became aware of a very faint phosphorescence, a subtle blue-green glow emanating from the walls themselves. As my eyes adjusted, the central chamber revealed itself. It was enormous, far larger than seemed possible given the constraints of the tunnel system we'd navigated. The ceiling soared at least 50 feet above us, supported by columns that looked disturbingly like massive calcified spinal cords. The walls pulsed visibly, light flowing through them in patterns that resembled blood through veins. But it was the center of the chamber that drew my eye, a raised dais upon which sat what I can only describe as a throne, though no human could have comfortably occupied it. The structure was composed of fused bone and sinew, with tendrils extending from its base into the floor, connecting it to the pulsing walls. And surrounding the dais, arranged in concentric circles, were hundreds of McDonald's Happy Meal toys, thousands of them, dating back decades, each placed with ritual precision. Some were partially melted, others modified in disturbing ways, extra limbs added, faces rearranged. A grotesque shrine to processed food and childhood marketing. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, unable to help myself. "Their collection," Margaret explained softly. "Mementos of those they've taken. Each toy represents a child." My stomach lurched. "Children? They take children? The youngest are the sweetest." Came a new voice from the darkness, musical, familiar, terrifying. I whirled around to see a figure standing near one of the bone columns. It was Sheriff Grayson, or rather, the thing wearing his form. Its glamour was better now, the facade more convincing in the dim light. "Welcome to our home, Daniel," it said pleasantly. "We've been expecting you." Frank immediately raised his flamethrower, but before he could trigger it, something lashed out from the darkness. A thin, whip-like appendage that wrapped around his throat. He was yanked backwards into the shadows with a choked cry, the flamethrower clattering to the ground. I lunged for the weapon, but another tendril snaked around my ankle, pulling me off balance. I fell hard, the bomb I'd been carrying skidding across the floor. Now, said the Grayson thing. "Let's not be hasty." Margaret remained perfectly still, making no move to help either of us. The entity noticed this and smiled. That too wide, inhuman smile. "Margaret knows better than to resist," it said. "Don't you, dear?" To my horror, Margaret nodded. "Yes, Overseer." "Margaret?" I gasped, understanding dawning. "You're one of them." This was a trap. "Not exactly one of us," the entity corrected. "More of a devoted servant. Margaret has been bringing us fresh meat for decades. Haven't you, Margaret?" The old woman's face was expressionless. "Someone has to maintain the balance, control the feeding, otherwise they'd take everyone." From the shadows emerged more figures, some I recognized from town, others wearing the faces of people I'd never met. Among them was Tucker, looking perfectly normal except for his eyes, which now glowed with that sickly green light. The resistance was never real, I realized aloud. It was all just another part of the game. The Grayson thing clapped its hands together delightedly. "Very good. You catch on quickly, Daniel. Makes me wish we could keep you around longer." "The others at the camp," I said, looking at Tucker. "Were they even human?" Tucker's face split in a grin, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "Some were, not anymore." The tendril around my ankle tightened, dragging me closer to the dais. I struggled, fumbling for Richard's gun, but it was no longer in my pocket. Looking for this? The entity held up the strange weapon. A fascinating device. Richard's been quite innovative over the years. What is it really? I asked, trying to buy time as I surreptitiously reached for the switchblade in my back pocket. A key of sorts, the creature explained, to the feeding grounds, to the town itself. It examined the gun with apparent fascination. Richard designed it to bind a human's life force to the Purge protocol. Willing sacrifice is so much more nutritious than forced consumption. So the Purge is real, I said, my fingers closing around the knife. It does feed the whole town to you. In a manner of speaking, it converts life energy into a form we can more easily absorb. Less messy than physical consumption, though we enjoy that too, from time to time. The thing wearing Grayson's face approached me, kneeling to examine me more closely. Richard was wise to choose you. Young, healthy, full of vitality and fear. The perfect catalyst. Its face was inches from mine now, the glamour slipping to reveal glimpses of the true form beneath. Something insectile, with too many eyes and mandibles where a mouth should be. I can smell your terror, Daniel, it whispered. It's exquisite. Now or never. I flicked open the knife and slashed upward, catching the creature across what passed for its throat. Black ichor sprayed from the wound, sizzling where it touched the ground. The entity reared back with a shriek of surprise and pain, losing its grip on Richard's gun. The tendril around my ankle loosened momentarily, and I tore free, scrambling toward the fallen weapon. Around me, the chamber erupted into chaos, the other entities converging on my position, Margaret shouting orders, Frank's body being dragged into the darkness. My hand closed around Richard's gun just as something heavy slammed into my back, driving me to the ground. I rolled over to find myself pinned beneath what had once been Tucker, his face now completely transformed, split open like a flower to reveal rows of glistening teeth. Should have triggered the Purge when you had the chance, the Tucker thing gurgled. Now we'll take you the old-fashioned way. Its jaws distended, preparing to bite down on my face. In desperation, I jammed the barrel of Richard's gun into its mouth and pulled the trigger. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The gun didn't fire a bullet. Instead, a pulse of blue-white energy erupted from the barrel, flowing into the creature's body. Tucker's form convulsed, the flesh rippling and then collapsing inward like a deflating balloon. Within seconds, nothing remained but a puddle of steaming black liquid and empty clothes. The chamber went silent, all entities freezing in place. Even the walls stopped pulsing. The Harvester, the Grayson thing whispered, its voice now tinged with something I hadn't heard from these creatures before. Fear. Richard gave you the Harvester. I scrambled to my feet, pointing the gun at the nearest entity. Stay back! They retreated, forming a loose circle around me. Margaret had disappeared into the shadows. That weapon doesn't just kill, Daniel, the Grayson thing said, its tone cautious now. It consumes, transfers life force from one vessel to another. I looked down at the gun, noticing for the first time that it seemed to be glowing faintly, the strange symbols etched into its barrel pulsing with a blue light. Richard wouldn't have given this to you without a reason, the entity continued. He wants you to feed us, yes, but only after you've been prepared. Prepared how? I demanded, keeping the gun raised as I backed toward what I hoped was an exit. The creature's mouth stretched into that terrible smile again. Why don't you ask him yourself? From behind the throne emerged a familiar figure, Richard, looking exactly as he had in his office. But as he stepped into the phosphorescent light, I saw that he too had changed. His eyes glowed with the same green light as the others, and his movements had that same wrong quality. Too fluid, too precise. Daniel, he greeted me calmly. I see you've discovered the true purpose of my gift. You're one of them, I said, though it wasn't really a surprise at this point. You always were. Richard shook his head. Not exactly. I'm something in between. A hybrid. A guardian. A liar, I spat. You sent me to trigger the Purge, to feed an entire town to these things. To control the feeding? Richard corrected. To maintain the balance. The town was lost centuries ago, Daniel. Most of the residents aren't even human anymore. Just echoes. memories given form. Like Mrs. Fletcher, I said, remembering her strange, jerky movements. Precisely. The real people of Driftwood are long gone. What remains is just a shadow play. A farm we maintain to draw in outsiders like you. Fresh meat. I kept the gun trained on Richard as I processed this. So, the purge is necessary, Richard insisted. Without it, they grow too hungry, too desperate. They spread beyond Driftwood. The rules break down completely. Why me? Why choose me to trigger it? Richard's expression might have been almost sad if not for those inhuman eyes. Because you're special, Daniel. You have a particular quality these beings value. A capacity for adaptation, for transformation. I'm not becoming one of you, I said firmly. You already are, Richard replied softly. From the moment you ate the food in the employee break room, from the moment you touched the walls of the tunnel, the change has already begun. I thought about the strange dreams I'd been having, the moments of disorientation, the way the town had seemed to watch me. Had I been changing all along without realizing it? The gun binds you to this place, Richard continued. Each time you use it, the transformation accelerates. Tucker was just the beginning. Soon, you'll have consumed enough to take my place, to become the new manager. Horror washed over me as I understood what they had planned. And if I refuse? Richard gestured around the chamber. Look at your options, Daniel. You can't leave town. You can't fight all of us. You can either embrace your role or, he shrugged, become just another toy in the collection. The entities had been slowly closing their circle around me as we talked, their hunger palpable in the air. The gun in my hand felt heavier, warmer, almost alive. There is another option, I said, raising the gun to my own temple. Richard's eyes widened. That would be unwise. Tell me why, I demanded. What happens if I pull this trigger while it's pointed at myself? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Whatever this weapon did, whatever energy it channeled, turning it on myself was something they feared. The gun doesn't just transfer life force, I guessed, watching Richard's reaction. It transfers consciousness. Identity. That's how you've survived so long, isn't it? Jumping from one body to another when yours wore out. Richard's expression confirmed my theory. You're not ready for that knowledge, Daniel. The gun wasn't meant to be used that way. But something else was clicking into place. The strange figure in the tunnel with my face. The first sacrifice who had warned me. What if that wasn't just any previous employee? What if that was the original Richard, his consciousness trapped in this endless cycle? I think I understand now, I said, keeping the gun at my temple. This whole place is a trap, not just for the town, but for whoever becomes the manager. You're as much a prisoner as anyone. Richard's facade cracked, just for a moment, revealing a flash of desperation. You don't understand what you're dealing with. The gun is keyed to you now. If you die while holding it, something much worse happens. Worse than becoming one of you? Worse than feeding an entire town to monsters? The entities were growing restless, making those wet, clicking sounds. The Grayson thing looked to Richard, its expression unreadable. He knows too much now, it said. Either bind him or consume him. Richard took a step toward me. Daniel, listen to me. There's a way out of this. A way to end the cycle. But not like this. Not by... I never heard the end of his sentence. From somewhere in the chamber came a massive explosion. Then another, shaking the entire structure. The entities screeched in confusion as pieces of the ceiling began to collapse. Through the chaos, I spotted a figure in the entrance tunnel, Margaret, holding the detonator for the bombs. Our eyes met across the chamber, and I saw her mouth something that might have been "I'm sorry" before she triggered another explosion. The floor beneath my feet cracked open, and I fell into darkness. Richard's gun still clutched in my hand. The last thing I saw was the central chamber collapsing inward, entities shrieking as they were crushed beneath tons of rock and organic matter. Then nothing but the rushing air, the sensation of falling, and the absolute certainty that this wasn't the end, that whatever Richard had been trying to tell me, whatever secret way out of this nightmare existed, I was about to discover it the hard way. As I plummeted into the abyss, one thought crystallized in my mind. The McDonald's in Driftwood had many rules, but no one had ever explained the most important one. What happens when the manager's chosen successor refuses the position? I was about to find out. I'm not sure how long I fell. Time seemed to stretch and distort in the darkness. There was no impact, no sudden stop, just a gradual slowing, as if I were sinking through increasingly dense liquid rather than air. When I finally stopped moving, I found myself floating in absolute blackness. No light, no sound, not even the sensation of a floor beneath my feet, just nothing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding flat and muffled, as if the darkness itself were absorbing the sound. No response. I tried to move, to swim through whatever medium was holding me suspended, but my limbs felt leaden and unresponsive. "Is anyone there?" I tried again. "Everyone is here, Daniel," came a response, not from any particular direction, but from everywhere at once. The voice was familiar yet alien, like multiple people speaking in perfect unison. And no one. "Where am I?" "Between," the voice replied. "Between above and below. Between then and now. Between what is and what might be." Great. Cryptic bullshit was exactly what I needed right now. "Show yourself," I demanded. A chuckle rippled through the darkness. "Which self would you prefer to see?" Light bloomed suddenly, not illuminating my surroundings, but rather creating floating, ghostly images all around me. Faces, dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, surrounding me in a sphere of glowing visages. Some I recognized. Richard, Tucker, Mitch, Mrs. Fletcher, Sheriff Grayson. Others were strangers, men and women of various ages and ethnic backgrounds, all watching me with the same unblinking intensity. "What is this?" I whispered. "Memory," the chorus of voices replied. "Identity. The collected consciousness of all who have served as manager." The faces shifted and flowed, merging and separating like oil on water. I noticed I was still clutching Richard's gun, though it now seemed to be part of my hand, the metal and flesh indistinguishable. "The harvester," the voices said, noticing my gaze. "Our salvation and our prison." "What does it do?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "It consumes and preserves," the voices explained. "When one manager's body fails, their consciousness transfers to the gun, waiting for a suitable new host. When that host uses the gun, the transfer begins. So when I shot Tucker, you began the process. His life force feeds the gun, prepares it for the greater transfer." I looked at the faces surrounding me, horrified realization dawning. "You're all trapped in here, all the past managers." "Not trapped," they corrected. "Preserved. United. We are the collective memory, the accumulated knowledge that enables each new manager to maintain the protocols." "And Richard, is he here too?" The faces shifted, rearranging until Richard's was central, larger than the others. His expression was solemn. His eyes, his human eyes, not the glowing green ones from the entity, sad. "I tried to warn you, Daniel," Richard's voice said, distinct now from the chorus. "There's a reason I chose you specifically." "Because I'm adaptable?" I spat. "Because I'd make a good monster?" "Because you're stubborn," Richard replied. "Because you question everything. Because you might be the one to finally break the cycle." That wasn't what I'd expected. "What cycle? What are you talking about?" The darkness around us rippled, and suddenly we weren't floating in void anymore. Instead, I found myself standing in what appeared to be driftwood, but different, older. The buildings were wooden structures from another century, horse-drawn carriages instead of cars. People in 19th century clothing walked the streets. Driftwood began as a mining town. Richard's voice narrated as the scene unfolded around us. The original settlers discovered something in the caves, something ancient, hungry, alien. They made a bargain. The scene shifted, showing a group of desperate-looking men in a cave, facing writhing shadows with glowing eyes. "Sacrifice in exchange for prosperity," Richard continued. "The miners would feed the entities. And in return, their town would flourish. The gold would flow. Disease would pass them by. Crops would grow even in drought years. Another shift, and now I saw a different version of driftwood, early 20th century from the looks of it. A general store stood where the McDonald's would eventually be built. As the town grew, the arrangement evolved, Richard explained. The entities weren't satisfied with occasional sacrifices anymore. They wanted to feed regularly, sustainably. The position of manager was created. A human intermediary who would enforce the rules, maintain the balance between the hunger of the entities and the survival of the town. I watched as the town continued to evolve through the decades, the general store becoming a diner, then finally the McDonald's I knew. Through it all, the position of manager passed from one person to another, each bearing a weapon that looked similar to the gun I now held. But something went wrong, Richard said as the images began to speed up, growing darker, more distorted. The entities grew stronger with each feeding, more demanding. The boundaries between their world and ours thinned. They began to replace townspeople with copies, echoes. By the 1980s, most of Driftwood wasn't human anymore. The scene settled on a view of the McDonald's from what appeared to be the early 1990s. A younger Richard was visible through the office window, looking over the same rulebook I had studied. When I became manager in 1992, the situation was already critical. The entities had spread throughout the town. The purge protocol, originally designed to satisfy them for years at a time, was now required almost annually. Eventually, even that wouldn't be enough. So what's the cycle you mentioned? I asked. What am I supposed to break? Richard's face replaced the McDonald's scene, floating before me in the darkness. The cycle of consumption and expansion. Every generation, the entities grow stronger, require more feeding. Every generation, more of the outside world is at risk. And how exactly am I supposed to break this cycle? By becoming the next manager? By feeding them like you did? No. Richard's expression was intense. By destroying them at their source. By using the harvester the way it was originally intended. The gun, hand pulsed with blue light, at his words. The first manager created this weapon not just to transfer consciousness, but to drain the entities themselves, to consume the consumers. But it requires a willing sacrifice, a manager who uses the weapon on themselves at the boundary stone. Suicide? I asked incredulously. That's your solution? Not suicide, Richard corrected. Transcendence. The manager's consciousness would merge with the entities, controlling them from within, forcing them back to their original domain. If that's possible, why hasn't any manager done it before? The chorus of voices answered, overlapping in a cacophony of justification and regret. Too afraid, didn't understand. The entities prevented it. Became one with them instead. Chose power over sacrifice. Richard's voice cut through the others. I tried, Daniel. 3 times I went to the boundary stone with this intention. Each time they stopped me. That's why I chose you, a outsider they wouldn't suspect. Someone who could get there before they realized the plan. Where is this boundary stone? I asked, though part of me was still skeptical. How could I trust anything Richard told me after all his previous lies? Where the town meets the forest, at the northernmost point, Richard replied. A large stone covered in symbols, set in a circle of smaller stones, the original binding site, where the first pact was made. The void around us shifted again, showing me a forest clearing with a massive, irregular boulder at its center. The stone was covered in carvings, some that looked Native American, others reminiscent of the symbols in the rulebook and on the gun. And if I do this, sacrifice myself at this stone, what happens to Driftwood, to the real humans still trapped there? Richard hesitated, and in that hesitation, I sensed deception. The truth, I insisted. Those who remain, he finally said. Those who are still fully human, they would likely die too. The binding that keeps the entities in check also sustains the town now. Break one, you break both. So I trade the town for what? The safety of the outside world. Yes, Richard said simply. One small, already half-consumed town versus the potential spread of these entities across the entire region. They've been growing stronger for decades, Daniel. The rules barely contain them anymore if they break free completely. He didn't need to finish the thought. I'd seen what these things could do, what they were capable of. If they spread beyond Driftwood, no McDonald's rulebook would save the surrounding communities. And if I refuse? If I just leave town? The chorus of voices laughed, a disturbing, multi-layered sound. You can't leave, Daniel, they said in unison. You're already changing, already part of this place. As if to emphasize their point, pain suddenly lanced through my body. I looked down at my free hand and saw that my fingers were elongating, the joints multiplying, the skin turning grayish and translucent. What's happening to me? I gasped. The transformation accelerates without a host, Richard explained urgently. The Harvester is trying to remake you into something that can contain the collective consciousness. You need to make a choice quickly, before it's too late. The darkness around me was beginning to pulse with that same organic quality I'd seen in the tunnels. I could feel it pressing against me, trying to get in through every pore. How do I get to the boundary stone? I asked, fighting against the growing pain. The void around me began to dissolve, light breaking through the darkness. Follow the gun, Richard's voice said, already fading. It will lead you there. Wait, I still have questions. Hurry, Daniel, the chorus intoned as they faded from view. The cycle must be broken. The hunger must end. I jerked awake with a gasp, finding myself half buried in rubble at the bottom of a shaft. Pain radiated through my body, but it was normal pain. Bruises, cuts, potential broken ribs. Not the transformative agony I'd felt in the void. The gun was still in my hand, but it looked normal again, though the symbols etched into its surface now glowed with a faint blue light. As I watched, the barrel swiveled slightly, like the needle of a compass, pointing toward a narrow tunnel that led away from the collapsed chamber. Follow the gun. Right. I extracted myself from the debris, wincing at the various injuries I'd sustained in the fall. My watch was shattered, so I had no idea how long I'd been unconscious. But the air in the tunnel felt different, fresher somehow, suggesting it might lead toward the surface. The gun tugged gently in my hand, pulling me toward the tunnel entrance. I had little choice but to follow, though my mind raced with doubts. Was I really going to sacrifice myself based on a vision that might have been nothing more than a hallucination? Could I trust anything Richard had told me, even in that strange in-between space? But what alternatives did I have? I couldn't stay in these tunnels forever. I couldn't go back to the McDonald's, now buried under tons of rock. And if what Richard said was true, I couldn't leave town without completing my transformation into something inhuman. The tunnel sloped gradually upward, the gun pulling me forward with increasing urgency. After what felt like hours of walking, I saw it, a faint grayish light ahead that could only be the outside world. I emerged into pre-dawn darkness, the sky just beginning to lighten on the eastern horizon. I found myself on a forested hillside overlooking Driftwood. From this vantage point, I could see the entire town, including the McDonald's, which was still standing despite the collapse of the chambers beneath it. But something was wrong with the town. Even from this distance, I could see movement in the streets. Too much movement for this early hour, and not the normal patterns of human activity. Shadows flowed between buildings, and occasionally I caught glimpses of elongated forms loping down the main street. The entities had emerged from beneath the town. The collapse of the central chamber had broken whatever remaining containment had held them underground. The gun pulled harder in my hand, nearly dragging me toward the tree line to my right. I followed, moving as quickly as my injured body would allow. The forest grew denser as I walked, old-growth trees blocking out the strengthening dawn light. After about 20 minutes of hiking, I came upon a clearing that matched what Richard had shown me in the vision, a perfect circle of untouched ground, ringed by smaller stones, with a massive boulder at its center. The boundary stone. As I approached, the carvings on the boulder began to glow with the same blue light as the symbols on the gun. The weapon was now pulling so hard I could barely keep hold of it, the barrel aimed directly at the stone. This was it. The moment of choice. If Richard had been telling the truth, firing the gun at the boundary stone while holding it would sacrifice me, but potentially save countless others by containing the entities. If he'd been lying, well, I had no way of knowing what would really happen. But I'd seen enough of Driftwood to know that these entities couldn't be allowed to spread. I'd witnessed their hunger, their casual cruelty, their view of humans as nothing more than food and entertainment. Whatever the cost, they had to be stopped. I raised the gun, pressing the barrel against the central symbol on the boundary stone. The carving pulsed in response, the blue light intensifying. "I hope you're right about this, Richard," I murmured. Before I could pull the trigger, a voice called from the edge of the clearing, "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Daniel." I turned to see the regular standing at the tree line, not in the form of Sheriff Grayson or any other human disguise, but in its true form. The sight was so alien, so fundamentally wrong in its geometry and composition, that my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. It was tall, easily 7 feet, with limbs that bent in impossible directions and a face that seemed to be constantly shifting, features flowing like wax, melting and reforming. "That's not what the gun is for," it said in that musical voice I remembered from the drive-through speaker. "Richard has lied to you just as he lied to others before you." "Stay back," I warned, keeping the gun pressed to the stone. The regular took a step forward, its movements liquid and unsettling. "You humans are so quick to sacrifice yourselves based on partial information. Richard didn't tell you everything. Couldn't tell you everything because he himself doesn't know the full truth." Despite my better judgment, I hesitated. "What truth?" "The boundary stone doesn't destroy us," the regular explained, taking another step forward. "It merely relocates us. Sends us back to our original domain, yes, but only temporarily. And with each cycle, with each manager's sacrifice, the barrier between our worlds thins further." It gestured at the stone beneath my gun. "This ritual has been performed 17 times since the first pact. Each time, we return stronger, hungrier. Richard believes he's fighting us, but he's merely following the pattern we established centuries ago." "Why should I believe you over him?" I demanded, though doubt had crept into my resolve. "Because I'm offering you a third option," the regular said, now at the inner edge of the stone circle. "Neither sacrifice nor transformation. A true bargain, freely entered." "What kind of bargain?" The regular's shifting face formed something approximating a smile. "I can show you how to modify the ritual, how to create a permanent barrier rather than a temporary banishment. It would contain us forever within Driftwood. No more expansion, no more cycles." "At what cost?" I asked, knowing there had to be one. "Driftwood itself," the regular replied. "The town would become our permanent feeding ground, cut off from the outside world completely. Those within its boundaries, human and non-human alike, would remain our sustenance forever." "That's hardly better than Richard's plan," I said. "Either way, the town is sacrificed." "But you wouldn't be," the regular pointed out. "And unlike Richard's solution, mine is permanent. No more managers, no more cycles, no more risk to the outside world. A clean end." I studied the entity, trying to discern any hint of deception in its constantly shifting features. And how exactly would I modify the ritual? The gun must be fired by someone else, someone who has consumed the collected consciousness but not yet transformed. That would be you. It gestured to its own chest. "And it must be fired into a vessel of sufficient capacity. That would be me." "You're volunteering to be shot?" I asked skeptically. "I am volunteering to become the permanent container," the regular corrected. "The anchor that binds all of us to this place. It is not a pleasant fate, even for one such as me. But the hunger grows tiresome after centuries. The constant need for new feeding grounds, new packs, new deceptions." Something in its tone made me pause. "You're tired of this? Of consuming? Even predators can grow weary of the hunt, Daniel. Even gods can tire of worship." The gun pulsed in my hand, the blue light flaring as if in protest. I could feel Richard and the other managers trying to influence me, pushing me toward the original plan. "How do I know this isn't just another trick?" I asked. "Another way to manipulate me?" The regular made a gesture that might have been a shrug, its limbs moving in ways that hurt to look at. "You don't. That is the nature of choice, is it not? Uncertainty, risk, faith in one's own judgment." Dawn had fully broken now, sunlight streaming into the clearing. In the distance, I could hear faint sounds from town, screams, crashes, inhuman calls. Whatever was happening in Driftwood, it was escalating. I had to decide. Trust Richard and sacrifice myself, potentially continuing a cycle that might never end. Trust the regular and condemn Driftwood to an eternity as a feeding ground, but permanently contain the threat, or reject both options and risk the entity spreading beyond the town's borders. The gun trembled in my hand, the collected consciousness of all previous managers radiating disapproval. But I wasn't one of them, not yet, not fully. I still had my own will, my own judgment. I looked at the regular, standing perfectly still now, waiting for my decision. "If I do this, if I shoot you instead of the stone, what exactly happens to me afterward?" I asked. "Do I just walk away?" "You walk away," the regular confirmed. "Changed, certainly. One cannot encounter our kind without transformation, but still yourself, still human in the ways that matter most. Changed. Like Mitch? Like Tucker? Like Richard? The possibilities were horrifying, but still preferable to death or complete transformation into something like the entities. And everyone in town? The real humans? Already lost." The regular said, not unkindly, "Since the collapse of the central chamber, my brethren have been feeding freely. By now, few if any unaltered humans remain in Driftwood." I closed my eyes, weighing my options one final time. When I opened them, my decision was made. I turned away from the boundary stone and pointed the gun at the regular. "If you're lying to me," I said quietly, "I'll find a way to make you regret it. For eternity." The regular's face rippled into an expression that might have been respect. Noted. I pulled the trigger. The effect was nothing like when I'd shot Tucker. Instead of a simple pulse of energy, the gun erupted with blinding blue-white light, a continuous stream connecting the barrel to the regular's chest. The entity didn't scream or struggle. It simply stood there, absorbing the energy, its form growing more solid, more defined with each passing second. Inside my head, I heard the voices of the managers howling in protest, Richard's among them. The gun grew hotter in my hand, burning my flesh, but I couldn't release it, couldn't stop the process now that it had begun. The regular's body began to change, its fluid shifting form hardening into something more concrete, still alien, still fundamentally wrong by human standards, but fixed now, immobile. As I watched, roots erupted from its lower limbs, burrowing into the ground of the clearing. Its upper limbs stretched outward, becoming branch-like protrusions that reached toward the sky. The gun's light intensified to an unbearable brightness, and I felt something tearing inside me, the collected consciousness being ripped away, channeled through the weapon and into the regular's transforming body. With each passing second, my mind felt clearer, lighter, more wholly my own. The boundary stone began to crack, fissures spreading across its surface as its blue light faded. The smaller stones surrounding the clearing lifted from the ground, floating in the air momentarily before shooting toward the regular, embedding themselves in its now tree-like trunk. A shock wave of energy exploded outward from the clearing, knocking me off my feet. The gun flew from my hand, no longer connected to me by that strange bond. As it hit the ground, it shattered into fragments, the metal turning to dust that blew away on the sudden wind. When I managed to stand again, the clearing had transformed. Where the regular had stood was now a massive, twisted tree unlike any I'd ever seen, its bark rippling with faces that appeared and disappeared like reflections in disturbed water, its branches reaching impossibly high into the sky. The boundary stone was gone, replaced by a pool of what looked like liquid mercury that occasionally formed shapes before dissolving again. And the town of Driftwood, visible through a gap in the trees, was changing. A shimmering dome of energy was forming over it, like a bubble enclosing the entire town. Within that dome, buildings twisted and reformed, streets rippled and flowed, the entire landscape becoming more alien, more reflective of the entity's true nature. It was working. The bargain was being fulfilled. Driftwood was being sealed off, becoming a permanent enclosure for the entities. I felt different too. My perceptions had sharpened. Colors were more vivid, sounds clearer, scents more complex. When I looked at my hands, the skin appeared normal, but I could somehow sense the change beneath the surface. Not a transformation into something inhuman, but not entirely human either. Something in between. "You chose well," came a voice, not spoken aloud, but resonating in my mind. It was the regular, its consciousness now part of the massive tree. The boundary is forming. The cycle is broken. "What happens now?" I asked, unsure if I needed to speak aloud for it to hear me. "Now you leave," the entity replied, "before the boundary solidifies completely. You have perhaps 5 minutes. And after I leave? What then?" I sensed what might have been amusement from the tree entity. "Then you live, Daniel Pierce. Changed, yes, but free. The only one who knows the truth about Driftwood. The only one who remembers." I looked back at the shimmering dome over the town. Already it was becoming more opaque, the details of Driftwood increasingly obscured behind it. "Will you be conscious in there? For eternity?" I couldn't help asking. "We will dream," the regular replied. "Dream and feed and exist in our own domain. It is not an unpleasant fate. And if someone else discovers this place, tries to enter, they will see only an abandoned town, too toxic to approach. The boundary works both ways, keeping us in, keeping others out." The dome was solidifying rapidly now, the time for questions running out. "Go, Daniel," the tree entity urged. 4 minutes remain. Follow the path beyond the clearing. It will lead you to the highway. I took one last look at the twisted tree that had been the regular, at the shimmering dome that contained Driftwood, at the clearing that had nearly been my final resting place. "Goodbye," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was addressing the regular, the town, or the human I had been before coming to this place. Then I turned and began walking down the path, away from Driftwood, away from the McDonald's with its strange rules and hungry customers, away from a chapter of my life that had changed me forever. Behind me, the boundary sealed with a sound like a massive door closing. Ahead lay the unknown. A life is something not quite human, carrying memories and knowledge no one else would ever believe. I kept walking, never looking back, even when I heard a whisper on the wind that sounded suspiciously like the drive-through speaker at the Driftwood McDonald's. "Thank you for your order, Daniel. Please come again." 3 years later, the truck stop diner just outside Salem, Oregon was nearly empty at 3 a.m., just the way I liked it. I sat in my usual booth by the window, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The waitress, Doris, knew better than to offer a refill. I'd been coming here every Tuesday night for the past 2 years, and I always ordered the same thing. 1 cup of coffee, 1 slice of apple pie, both of which I barely touched. "You look tired tonight, Danny," Doris said, wiping down the counter for the 3rd time. She was in her 60s, with dyed red hair and the kind of weathered face that had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. "Those long hauls taking a toll?" I managed to smile. "Something like that. My truck was parked outside, a semi I'd bought with the settlement money from the Driftwood disaster, as the newspapers had called it. The official story was that a gas leak had caused a catastrophic explosion, destroying the town and killing all its residents. The area had been cordoned off, declared an environmental hazard zone due to toxic chemicals released in the blast. Only I knew the truth. Only I remembered Driftwood as it was, and what it had become. "Any interesting stops this week?" Doris asked, making conversation despite knowing I rarely gave more than one-word answers. "The usual route," I replied. "Portland to Boise and back." What I didn't tell her was that my route always included a detour, a careful circle around the place where Driftwood had been, where a shimmering dome still stood, invisible to most human eyes. But not to mine. The changes the regular had mentioned hadn't been as dramatic as I'd feared. Outwardly, I looked the same, maybe a bit paler. My eyes a bit more sensitive to light, requiring sunglasses even on cloudy days. But inwardly, I was different. Food had lost most of its appeal. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, I dreamed of tunnels and entities and a McDonald's where the rules were matters of life and death. And I could see things others couldn't, the shimmer of the dome over driftwood, but also the subtle signs of the entity's influence elsewhere. Over the past 3 years, I'd identified 4 other towns across the country with the same feel as driftwood. Places where the rules didn't quite match reality, where something hungry lurked beneath the surface. I hadn't interfered. Not yet. I was still learning, still understanding what I had become and what I could do about it. The bell above the diner door jingled, pulling me from my thoughts. A man walked in, tall, thin, unremarkable in every way, except for how he moved. Too smoothly, too precisely. My skin prickled with recognition. He sat at the counter, ordered coffee, then turned to look directly at me. His face was bland, forgettable, but his eyes were Richard's. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, already sliding into the booth across from me. "Depends on who's asking," I replied, my hand instinctively moving to the knife in my pocket. Not that it would do much good if this was what I suspected. An old colleague, you might say. The man smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "Though we never formally met, my name is Phillips. I manage the McDonald's in Millhaven, about 200 miles south of here." Millhaven, one of the towns I'd identified as having the same wrong feeling as driftwood. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling," I said, starting to rise. Phillips raised a hand. "Please, I'm not here to recruit you or threaten you, just to talk." Against my better judgment, I sat back down. "Talk about what?" He took a sip of his coffee, grimacing slightly at the taste. "About what you did in driftwood, about the regular, about the bargain." My blood ran cold. "How do you know about that?" "Word travels, especially among our kind." Phillips set down his cup. "What happened in driftwood created quite a disturbance. Ripples that affected all the connected sites." "Connected sites?" I repeated. "You mean other towns like driftwood? Other feeding grounds?" Phillips nodded. "There are 17 active locations in North America alone, each with its own manager, its own protocols, its own arrangement. And you're one of the managers." "I was," he corrected, "until 3 weeks ago, when my location experienced its own incident. Not as dramatic as driftwood, but similar in certain respects. The containment was breached. The feeding became disorderly." "Why are you telling me this?" Philip studied me with those 2 knowing eyes. "Because you're the only one who's ever broken the cycle. The only manager-elect who found a third option." He leaned forward. "I want to know how you did it. How you convinced the regular to become the container." I laughed humorlessly. "I didn't convince it of anything. It was its idea." "Impossible," Philip said flatly. "The regulars are the eldest, the most powerful of their kind. They wouldn't sacrifice themselves willingly. This one did. Said it was tired of the endless hunger." Phillips fell silent, processing this information. Outside, the first hints of dawn were lightening the eastern sky. Soon the diner would fill with the morning crowd. Truckers, commuters, normal people living normal lives, unaware of the horrors lurking in towns like Driftwood and Millhaven. "We've been wrong about them," Phillips finally said. "About their nature, their intentions. We assumed they were simply predators, driven by hunger alone. But if they can grow weary, if they can choose to end the cycle," he trailed off, implications clearly disturbing him. "What happened to your town?" I asked. "To Millhaven? Nothing as dramatic as Driftwood's fate. The entities were contained, but the cost was high. Nearly half the town's population. And let me guess, now you need a new manager." Phillips nodded. "The position remains vacant. The protocols are unstable. Without a proper manager, Millhaven will experience another breach, likely worse than the first." I could see where this was heading. I'm not interested. I'm not asking you to become the manager, Phillips clarified. I'm asking you to do for Millhaven what you did for Driftwood. Find another solution. Break the cycle again. It's not that simple, I protested. What happened in Driftwood was unique. The regular there had its own reasons for cooperating. There's no guarantee the one in Millhaven would make the same choice. But you could try, Phillips pressed. You, who are neither fully human nor one of them. You, who understand both sides. I stared out the window, watching the sky lighten. In the reflection of the glass, I could see that Philip's face was beginning to slip, the human facade cracking slightly to reveal something else beneath. He was dying, I realized. Whatever had happened in Millhaven had fatally wounded him, and he was using the last of his energy to find a solution. Why me? I asked quietly. There must be other managers who could help. They're all bound by the old ways, the old protocols, Phillips said, his voice growing weaker. They cannot imagine alternatives. But you've seen another path. And if I refuse? Phillips' reflection in the window smiled sadly. Then Millhaven falls, and after it, perhaps the next town, and the next. The entities are growing bolder since Driftwood. The balance is shifting. I thought about the dreams I'd been having recently. Dreams of a McDonald's I'd never visited, in a town I'd never seen, where desperate employees followed strange rules to stay alive. Was that Millhaven? Were the entities somehow reaching out to me, showing me what was at stake? I'll think about it, I finally said. Phillips nodded, seemingly satisfied with that non-commitment. He slid a business card across the table, plain white, with just an address printed in black text. No phone number, no name. The McDonald's in Millhaven, he explained unnecessarily. If you decide to help, go there at midnight next Tuesday. Ask for the manager's special. And if I don't show up, Phillips was already standing, leaving his coffee untouched. Then I wish you luck, Daniel Pierce. You'll need it in the world that's coming. He walked out of the diner without looking back. Through the window, I watched him cross the parking lot, his movements becoming increasingly jerky and unnatural. By the time he reached the edge of the lot, his form seemed to be unraveling, flesh sloughing away to reveal the entity beneath. He didn't have long. Days, maybe hours. Doris appeared at my table with a fresh cup of coffee. "Friend of yours?" she asked, nodding toward the door. "No," I replied, pocketing the business card. "Just someone with a job offer." "You thinking of giving up the trucking gig?" I managed a smile that didn't reach my eyes, just considering my options. After Doris moved away, I stared into the black depths of my coffee, seeing reflections that shouldn't have been there. Faces, both human and inhuman, watching me from some other place. The collective awareness of the entities still connected to me through the changes they'd wrought in my being. The business card felt heavy in my pocket, a weight far beyond its physical presence. I knew what waited for me in Millhaven, another McDonald's with strange rules, another hungry darkness beneath the surface, another town teetering on the edge of becoming a feeding ground for eternity. I also knew I couldn't ignore it, not just because of the potential victims, but because of what Phillips had said. The entities were growing bolder. The balance was shifting. Whatever I had started in Driftwood by breaking the cycle, it had consequences beyond that one town. I paid my bill, leaving Doris her usual oversized tip, and walked out to my truck. The sky was fully light now, another day beginning. I climbed into the cab and sat there for a long moment, staring at nothing. In the rearview mirror, my eyes briefly flashed green before returning to normal. A reminder of what I was now. Not fully human, not fully entity, but something in between. Something with the power to make choices neither side could make on their own. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, heading west instead of east on my usual route. I had preparations to make, research to do. 6 days until next Tuesday. 6 days to figure out how to save another town from the fate Driftwood had narrowly avoided. 6 days to prepare myself for another confrontation with the regular, this time in a town where I had no allies, no inside knowledge, just the strange hybrid nature I'd gained in Driftwood and the experience of having broken the cycle once before. As I drove, a familiar jingle began playing on the radio, the McDonald's theme, though I hadn't turned the radio on. The sound grew distorted, slowing down until it became an eerie, dragging melody that barely resembled the original. Through the static, a voice spoke. Not Phillips, not Richard, but something older, deeper, more fundamental. "We're waiting for you, Daniel. We're all waiting for you." I switched off the radio, but the voice lingered in my mind, a promise and a threat wrapped into one. The arches remain, the protocols endure, the hunger never ends. I pressed harder on the accelerator, putting distance between myself and Salem, between myself and Driftwood, between myself and what I had been. But I couldn't outrun what I had become, or the knowledge that had come with it. Somewhere ahead lay Millhaven, with its McDonald's and its rules and its regular. Somewhere ahead lay another choice, another possible end to another vicious cycle. And somewhere beyond that, 15 other towns waited, each with its own Golden Arches protocol, each with its hunger, its bargains, its sacrifices. I couldn't save them all. But maybe, just maybe, I could save one more. Starting with Millhaven. I reached for my sunglasses as the morning sun crested the horizon, too bright for my sensitive eyes. In the brief moment before I put them on, I caught another glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror, my face overlaid with dozens of others, all watching, all waiting to see what I would choose. The road stretched out before me, long and empty in the early morning light. I drove on, toward Millhaven, toward the McDonald's, where the rules were matters of life and death, toward whatever waited for me there. The cycle had been broken once. Perhaps it could be broken again. And if not, well, I'd learned a thing or two about making bargains with monsters. After all, I was halfway to becoming one myself.